Okay, so today we're going to read chapter 5 in part 3 of The Last of the Really Great Whangdoodles. "You surprised me," he said. "I didn't think you'd make it." He noticed the wiffle bird in Tom's arms. "What's the matter with her?" Ben said, "She's hurt. She tried to save us, and the Gaiuscatus knocked her down." The proc looked dreadfully concerned and took a step forward. Tom clutched the bird protectively. The proc looked... I already said that. "Come along, boy," the proc snapped. "Give the wiffle bird to me." "Not on your life, you big bully," Tom whispered fiercely. "Oh, this is really too much." The proc stamped a long, thin foot in annoyance. "Do you realize the trouble you've caused? This is all your fault. The first accident we've had in the kingdom for a century. If you hadn't been here, none of this would have happened. You're an absolute menace." Tom was so angry that he yelled at the towering proc. "Our fault, is it? Well, that's a stupid remark. Who sent that? The monster out there to attack us? Who tipped off the gazooks and then sidewinders and the swamp gaboons? Who arranged to have Lindy captured by the Splinter Cat? It was all your fault." The boy choked with emotion as he looked down at his feathered bundle lying still in his arms. "If she doesn't get better, if she dies, I'll never forgive you. Never." The proc looked at Tom intently. Then he said in a quieter voice, "I suggest you give the bird to me. We know how to take care of her. She will be all right. I promise." Tom hesitated. Ben said, "Do as he says, Tom." The proc clapped his hands together. "Guard," he called. A large sidewinder came trundling around the corner. It looked very startled at the sight of the children. He took the wiffle bird from Tom. She was whimpering with genuine pain and sounded very different from the brave bird who had pretended such agony in front of the Splinter Cat. "You're sure she'll be all right?" the boy asked anxiously. "You know, she was trying to save me when she got hurt." He touched her gently in farewell. "We will do our best," the proc replied gravely. He handed the bird to the sidewinder, who walked quickly away. "Now, tell me about your friend, the professor," the proc said. "Why is he not with you?" "He just couldn't get here," Lindy answered. "He was so tired and he couldn't see the bridge." "It was too much for him," explained Ben. "He would have been all right if it hadn't been for all the things you put in our way." "He hasn't really been feeling well since we jumped off the brain strain," growled Tom. "That's when it started." "He told us to come on by ourselves," said Lindy. "He said he was sure the Whangdoodle would understand and would see us." "I see." The proc looked thoughtful, and there seemed to be a trace of disappointment in his voice. Then his expression changed, and he said briskly, "Well, I'm sorry, but this is the end of your journey. I can tell you now that the Whangdoodle will not receive you. You might just as well turn around, find your professor, and go home." "Oh, don't say that," Ben cried desperately. Tom said, "We promised the professor that we would speak with the Whangdoodle." "I've got to give him his regards," added Lindy tearfully. "There's nothing I can do," said the proc firmly, and he began to usher them towards the gates. The children hung back. Tom had never felt so depressed. "I want to wait to see if the wiffle bird is going to be all right." Huge tears rolled down Lindy's face. "We've worked so hard, it can't just end like this. Isn't there something you can do?" The proc was shaking his head. "I'm afraid not. You see," but he didn't finish, for with a sob Lindy rushed to his side and flung her arms around him. "Please," she begged, and buried her face into his thick, baggy sweater. She wept as if her heart would break. The proc knelt beside her. He was distinctly uncomfortable. "Now, Miss Lindy, you mustn't cry. I can't stand to see people cry." Lindy's hands stole up around his neck, and she clung to him tightly. He was red in the face and covered with confusion. Ben and Tom looked at each other. "It's okay, Lindy," Bendy said gently. "I guess it'll have to be like the professor says. Every once in a while people fail, in spite of everything, in spite of trying. He'll understand." "But I don't understand," she wailed. "At home, if somebody tried hard and really, really wanted to see the president, then they could." She gazed imploringly at the proc. "Dear proc, can't you just this once forget about being in charge? and that sort of thing. Couldn't you speak to the Whangdoodle for us? I want to see him more than anything in the whole world." The Proc hesitated. She looked at the boys and looked back at Lindy. He touched her tear-stained face. "Oh, you human beings," he said with feeling. "When will I ever learn?" He rubbed Lindy's cheek with the sleeve of his sweater. "Come along. I can see there's only one way to get any peace around here, and that's to let you meet the Whangdoodle." Lindy hugged him with all her strength. Tom and Ben could not believe the sudden turn of events. All right, the Proc waved away their thanks. Taking Lindy's hand, he said, "Come along, Miss Lindy, but for pity's sake, try not to cry any more. It gets me all emotional and I start to itch." He led them across the courtyard and under another archway past 2 sentry sidewinders standing rigidly at attention. The children gave them a wide berth. The palace was more beautiful than they had ever imagined. There were crystal courtyards with bright mosaic floors. Others were grassy with wildflower borders and contained sparkling fountains or tranquil pools with ambrosia blossoms floating on the milk-white water. The trees were magnificent, and there were flowers such as the children had never seen before. Flutterbys were everywhere. There was a cool breeze, and the scent of honeysuckle was strong and heady. Wind chimes made sweet music. The Proc walked quickly down a long vaulted passageway and paused in front of a wrought silver door. "Wait for me here," he said, and went inside. Ben, Tom, and Lindy looked at each other, their hearts pounding with excitement. The boys straightened their hair, and Lindy smoothed the wrinkles out of her clothes. She said longingly, "I wish the professor were here. We must remember every detail for him," Ben declared solemnly. The silver door opened, and the Proc emerged. "You may come in now," he said quietly. "You meet the Whangdoodle. You must address him as Your Majesty. Don't talk too much and don't get bouncy with excitement because the Whangdoodle seldom has company and is not used to it. Remove your hats and give them to me. Always go bare-headed in front of royalty. It shows respect." The children took off their scrappy caps and gave them to the Proc. He held open the door, and as they walked past him, he announced in a clear voice, "The Potter children, Your Majesty, Benjamin, Thomas, and Melinda." He closed the door behind them. They were in a cool, high-ceilinged room. It was white with tall windows, through which the sunlight fell onto a polished marble floor. The room was sparsely furnished. There was a long table bearing some choices of silver and a large, richly covered chair, which was framed by a beautiful tapestry that hung on the wall behind it. There was no one in the room. The children waited. The silence lengthened. Tom coughed, and a hollow echo came from the high ceiling. Quite suddenly, a cheerful voice said, "Well, I must say, you humans have changed a bit since the old days." The children jumped with alarm and found themselves witnessing an amazing sight. 2 eyes and a very large pair of antlers began to materialize from the tapestry, followed by the moose-like head that bore them. Next came 4 rather short legs attached to a round, barrel-like body. The children watched in wonder as the Whangdoodle crossed to his throne and sat down, nonchalantly folding his legs across his chest and crossing one leg back over the other. "Don't look so surprised." His voice was deep, and he spoke with an engaging lisp. "I was playing it safe. Didn't want you to see me before I'd had a peek at you, so I changed myself into the colors of the tapestry." The Whangdoodle was truly an extraordinary creature. I'm going to stop there, and I will read the rest of that chapter next time. See you then.